It's time to talk NFL draft on the Our Football Network. And we're going to talk Seattle Seahawks football. We haven't done that in a little bit. Last time, Corbin Smith has been on our program talking Seattle Seahawks football. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. Still a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world, but believe it or not as crazy as the last time Corbin and I spoke. So, Corbin, it's good to have you back here on the network, and want to remind everybody that not only do you host the Locked On Seahawks podcast, but you also, your main gig is you're the reporter for Seahawks Maven /SI. There's a lot that goes into how to find out specifically what your specific tag is and website is. So I'm going to let you handle that.
Yeah, you can find my stuff, si.com/NFL/Seahawks. We actually just rebranded recently to All Seahawks instead of Seahawk Maven, and we just think it sounds better, sounds cleaner. So it's All Seahawks. You can, again, find us, si.com/NFL/Seahawks, and Locked On Seahawks is available on all major podcast platforms, and we're streaming 5 days a week on YouTube now, so we're doing video casts as well.
Awesome. Great. Good to have you with us. And before we talk draft, Corbin, and it's probably not going to happen now because we're so close to the draft as far as any more free agent pickups. But does the team have enough capital that when the draft is over, if they don't feel like they've filled a specific hole, that they can go out there and add another veteran?
Well, right now they don't have a lot of money to work with because the nearly $50 million that they had in cap space to open free agency, they spent a good chunk of it to keep many of their own free agents. And they also went out and got Uchenna Nwosu from the Chargers, who's an intriguing young pass rusher that fits their 3-4 defense that they're shifting to pretty well. Had 40 pressures last year. They gave him pretty good money. So You add that in there with Quandre Diggs' new contract, re-signing Sidney Jones, Rashad Penny coming back. Quickly, the money dried up. So they're under $10 million in effective cap space right now. They do have a few moves they could make to quickly open up some space. If they wanted to bring back Dwayne Brown, for example, he's still a free agent. So I could see something like that happening after the draft. We just have to see what the Seahawks do at the tackle position, because right now they've got two guys on their 3 tackles that are on the roster that have as much starting experience as I do. Yeah. And so that's a problem. Their other guy has started 5 games. Jake Curham started 5 games last year. So they have 5 combined starts from their tackles on their roster. So, yeah, Dwayne Brown coming back is a possibility. Brandon Shell, their other former starter at right tackle, maybe he might be a little cheaper to bring back. So I think those alternatives are there, but they're going to wait until after the draft to see what moves they make at that position.
And there is a chance, there's a possibility, because in my mock draft, it worked out that way. There is a possibility that if the top 3 teams go edge rusher, and we know Hamilton will be picked the top 5, 6, 7, maybe. Let's say Pickett gets chosen. And let's just throw a receiver in there, because that's probably the last mix. And Gardner. That could make someone like Ike Ekwonu available at number 9, which I'm sure Seattle would be like, hey, just get that ticket up there as fast as you can. I don't really have a hard time believing that's going to happen, but it's a possibility.
Yeah, I don't think the top 2 tackles in this class, Evan Neal being the other one from Alabama, I don't think either one of those players will be there for Seattle at number 9, although we've seen crazy things happen in the first 10 picks of drafts pretty much every year. And if there's a quicker run on quarterbacks than expected, then that could totally flip the draft upside down. You might have a tackle that falls into that number 9 range that Seattle can draft. And of course, there are players like Charles Cross that are also getting some top 10 buzz as well. Trevor Penning has gotten a little bit of noise as far as being a potential sleeper to jump that high in the draft. I'd be surprised if 3 or 4 tackles go in the top 10, but certainly there are 3 or 4 guys in that position group that look like they've got first-round grades.
So you think that there is a possibility that if the top 2 tackles are off the board, that Cross could go to Seattle with that first pick?
I think it's a possibility. I don't know at number 9, based on the film that I've watched, I don't know if he's necessarily the guy that you go for at number 9. I think he's got a very high ceiling. He's also coming off of his redshirt sophomore season, so he's a lot younger player than some of the players that are going to go in the top 10. And there's a lot to like on the film. He's just coming from an air raid offense, going to Seattle's offense. I've seen enough on tape to suggest that he can make that adjustment, but I don't know if number 9 will be too rich or not for the Seahawks there. And we know John Schneider likes trading down. In a perfect scenario, he can move down a few spots and Cross is still there. And if you could get him at like 12, 13, 14 range, then that would be a home run pick for them. I just don't know if with a top 10 pick, if that's necessarily the direction they want to go.
And the good thing too is if obviously you trade down and get more picks, but once you start getting into that range, into the teens, you're now in a position where even if Cross were to get picked, well, now you're okay with, okay, well, I could still take Penning. I could still, there's still at least 2 other linemen, including the kid from Central Michigan, and I have no idea where he's going to go. He can go in the top 20. So I think that just gives you more options if you can't get the top 2 guys, that even if somehow Cross is gone, you're still okay, especially since you got that extra pick.
Yeah, and I think that that's always been the mindset of John Schneider is that, you know what, if I've got 3 or 4 guys still on my draft board that are available, I'm going to go get me another second or another third-round pick, and I'm going to slide down. And, again, a lot of this really falls on how the quarterback situation plays out, because if you have a quarterback like Malik Willis go early, like there's been some murmurs the Lions might take him at number 2. If Malik Willis gets picked in the top 5 picks, you're going to see some other teams that want quarterbacks, like, say, the Saints, who now have 2 first-rounders. They might start to get a little bit impatient about waiting and hoping they're going to get their guy. And you might see some really quick flips moving up back into the top 10 and paying an extra premium to do it. If that happens, John Schneider is going to be dancing in the war room because he's going to get a lot of offers for number 9.
And the same thing with Pickett, because I do believe that unless there is a trade before the draft where Carolina makes a deal for Baker Mayfield, I think there are a lot of people who I've talked to and myself who believe that they'll take Pickett. So if Pickett were to go there, even before Willis, now the same applies. Now everybody's going to, what could we do to get Willis? So one of those 2 quarterbacks goes early, then there's going to be that, because once you get past those top 2 guys, it's a pretty...
And I will say this, if Malik Willis slips to number 9, that's going to complicate things for John Schneider some, because I know the Seahawks met with him at the Combine, and he's got the physical tools that they love at the quarterback position. Big arm, super athletic. I don't think they would trade up to get him, but if he's there at number 9, that complicates matters trading down, because I don't know they want to draft a quarterback necessarily, but if they're going to, a high upside guy like that is going to at least make them consider.
Yeah, that's the thing that's real tricky, because I think most people, most scouts believe that, and I'm in agreement with them, that these 2 specific quarterbacks that could go in the top 10, talent-wise, if you put them on a big board, as far as talent in this draft, they're probably outside the top 20. But everybody needs quarterbacks. So it puts them in a much more desirable position because of that to get chosen early in the top 10. So then as a general manager, that's the tough question now. You have to say to yourself, do I, because if they believe that as well, they are saying basically to themselves, I'm trading, I'm moving, I'm basically I'm reaching a little bit for a guy at a position that I need. Should I be doing that? Especially for a kid that, yes, has a ton of potential, but it's also very raw and hasn't played a lot of SBS football at all. I mean, except a handful of games in 2 years. So that's a big risk in the top 10. And we know how many quarterbacks go in the top 10 and never make it in the NFL. Yep. And Schneider has been there so long. And we've already heard rumors the last year, maybe you could touch up on that as well with Carroll, that you do get to wonder how much longer Carroll, Schneider, how much longer do they have?
Yeah, that's really the big question. This is a critical draft. I think they bought themselves a little more time by moving Russell Wilson to the Broncos, because now, you can't as an owner reasonably expect right off the bat, okay, now if they would have went out and traded for Deshaun Watson or somebody, then the expectations change dramatically, especially because the controversy you would have been taking on. Like, you better be competing for titles if you make a move like that. But now they've kind of got that reset here where let's go get a young quarterback, whether it's this year or next year's draft, which looks like it's going to have a better crop of quarterbacks. There's always a risk if you take that route, though. What if Seattle ends up overachieving, which is a Pete Carroll thing? If Seattle ends up being competitive, even with 2 first-rounders, they might not be able to get up into the top 5 to get one of those quarterbacks. So that's the risk that you play there. You also don't want to reach, though, for the wrong guy. And I will say this. I wrote an article about this a couple weeks ago. There has never been a general manager-coach tandem that has been together 10-plus years that has had one superstar quarterback and then drafted another one that became a star quarterback. It just has not happened. Because even the 49ers, Bill Walsh was replaced by George Seifert, and they had multiple general managers with Steve Young and Joe Montana. I mean, it just doesn't happen. The Cowboys, they were part of the era with Landry and Tex Schramm was before the merger. And Roger Staubach was a solid quarterback, but they were a run-first football team. It was a different era. So there just hasn't been. I mean, it would be unprecedented if they were able to go out and get somebody like a Malik Willis or a Desmond Ridder, who they just met with, and that guy comes in and plays really well, earns the starting job. That would be new ground. It just hasn't happened for a GM coaching pair. You just don't see them last that long together in this league either. So,
and you bring up Ridder, Seattle with picks 40 and 41 in the second round. So
I don't think he'll be there.
But I guess the point is that there'll be, whether or not you want to use some ammo to move up again in the first round a little bit, or, and again, we have no idea who they really like. Maybe you know a little bit more, obviously, than most people following the team. Is if you do get past those 3, you still have 2 or 3 guys who are going to potentially be taken in the first couple of rounds. So is that also a possibility, whether it's Ridder or whether they stay put at 40-41, maybe a Corral slips a little. There's always going to be Howell possibilities. So can you still see them picking one of those guys?
Oh, absolutely. I think they've done their due diligence on all 5 quarterbacks. And at this point, I'm not going to say I'd be stunned that they'd pick a quarterback at number 9. If there's a guy they absolutely love, then you go and you roll the dice at the most important position in football. But they can't be reaching to do it. And I think John Schneider is smart enough to know that. So I don't anticipate they're going to do that unless it's a guy they just absolutely love. And if it's Desmond Ridder, then it's Desmond Ridder. If it's Malik Willis, then it's Malik Willis. But I could see them trading back into the first round with that ammo they have. They have a bunch of picks next year, too. Okay. So if there's a quarterback they do like and they just didn't want to pick him at 9 and he's still there late first round, you get that 5th-year option, which is critical with quarterbacks today, because even though it's getting pricier by the year, it's still a lot cheaper than throwing the big money deal these quarterbacks are asking for now. So that 5th year is especially important at the quarterback position. So I could see John Schneider wanting to move up with one of those second-round picks and some other ammo to go get that QB. If a guy like Sam Howell falls into the second round, I actually think Sam Howell is a better fit for the Seahawks than what he is for a lot of teams, because you look at his strengths. He's got a big arm. He has touch on the deep ball, so you know he can take the deep shots that Pete Carroll likes, and the receivers they've got are really good at that. And he also is a very mobile quarterback that can break tackles. He's a different type of runner than Russell Wilson. He actually breaks tackles. He's more of a – I actually call him mini Josh Allen in that regard. I see a kind of punishing runner when he wants to take off, and he's going to have to learn to slide. But, again – I see a lot of tools. He's got his flaws, but I just feel like in their scheme, the things they like to do, Sam Howell's a guy that intrigues me. I probably wouldn't take him in the first unless there's a major run on QBs and he's still there late in the first, then I go get him if I want him. But I think he's a guy that fits them better than he'll fit some of the other teams, and I could see him being a target potentially.
But you bring up a great point, though, because let's say Seattle thinks there's a good chance Howell could last till 40. But then they say to themselves, yeah, but maybe it's better for us to trade up anyway so we can get the 5th-year option on him.
I think you have to. If you're concerned you're going to lose that player. Now, let's say you get to pick 20 and only like one quarterback's off the board.
That's different, sure.
I'm not going to rule out that possibility either. Teams may be like, look, this just isn't a good quarterback class. We're going to go get our other players. If the Seahawks are in that position, John Schneider might be like, you know what? There's no point in me trading up. I mean, you could, of course, have 3 or 4 guys go real quick at the end of the first round. We've seen that happen too. But again, there's just so much uncertainty with how teams are going to handle this position, because most draft experts don't view this class highly at that position. I know a few that think a little bit differently. I wouldn't be shocked if there's a few guys in this class that John Schneider really likes, and he's got a pretty good track record evaluating quarterbacks, even though he's only drafted 2 of them since Seattle got him, because he liked Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes a lot going into the pre-draft process, and we've seen what those guys have done. So that's a position, if I'm a fan of the Seahawks, that I actually have some confidence that John Schneider can be able to find the right guy to replace.
And you bring up Howell, and I like Howell. And the only thing that concerned me a little bit, which I'm sure concerned everybody, even though I don't put too much stock into it, was his performance in the Senior Bowl, which was awful. But again, he's coming from a completely different system. He's only been there a little short.
Dak Prescott was awful in the Senior Bowl.
I don't take stock in it. What I like about him is, because some people are going to go, yeah, but he's in that system, and it just doesn't work in the NFL. Only Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray have really had a lot of successors that. But then I go, yeah, but Tim Howell can do what Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray can do. That's why I think Howell is intriguing. Because like you said, he can run. He's athletic. He's got a strong arm. So he has a lot of the intangibles you're looking for, where you can say, hey, if he could break that mold like a Mahomes and a Kyler Murray, you know what? I think Howell's the type of guy that can do it.
Yeah, I just look at Seattle's scheme and what they've typically wanted their quarterback to do. I mean, Pete Carroll runs a run-first offense, but he is aggressive with the passing game, sometimes to a fault. He wants to take those downfield shots. And so I can't see a quarterback like Kenny Pickett, who I don't view that as a strength in his game, throwing the ball downfield. I can't see him being somebody that they'd be interested in targeting. They've obviously looked at his pro day and stuff. And even Matt Corral, who they met with at the combine, he does a lot of things Seattle likes. He's inconsistent as a deep ball thrower, though, and his ball tends to flutter sometimes. So I'm hesitant to go out there and say that he's going to be a quarterback. I mean, he checks off a lot of the other boxes, so maybe they would go that route. But I just feel like Howell and Malik Willis and even Desmond Ridder. Desmond Ridder does not have the strongest arm, but there are plenty of plays on film where you can see the touch on deep passes. And so I would put him in front of those other 2 guys in terms of downfield vertical passing. If you're looking at more of a short to intermediate quick game, then guys like Kenny Pickett could be money. But scheme has so much to do with success in this league, particularly quarterback.
But bottom line is you would be surprised if Seattle does not take a quarterback in this draft.
I'm leaning towards 60-40 at this point, because
not that surprised.
I just think
just
that
a little bit.
John Schneider, something tells me based on what I've been told. Nobody has told me they are going to definitively take a quarterback, but based on what I've been told, there are a few guys in this class that they are intrigued by. And so I don't think they're going to reach for him, but if the right guy's there into the first round or somehow slips into the second round where they've got those back-to-back picks, then I can absolutely see them taking a quarterback, because they expect to be competitive this year. I don't know how you can sell that, though, with Geno Smith and Drew Lock being your guys that are competing to be the quarterback. So, maybe one of those guys, if they've got a great run game with them, can be effective. And Pete Carroll has done that with mid-level quarterbacks before, at the college level too. But that's a lot of faith to put in guys that both have losing records as starters in the NFL.
Okay. Now, I'm going to pop up the depth chart from our lads, Seattle. And I want to start on defense as we take a look at, because you mentioned that they're switching their scheme. So they're going to go from a 4-3 to a 3-4. Okay.
Yep.
And tell us about their new defensive coordinator.
So Clint Hurt has been with the Seahawks since 2017. He got elevated from defensive line coach, and he has a 3-4 background. He worked under Vic Fangio in Chicago for several years. And so I'd be lying if I say that they're going to a strictly 3-4 defense, because that's not what they're doing. But they are going to run more 3-4 sets. It's going to be a more Vic Fangio style defense. I think when they're in their nickel situations, they'll have some 4-man pressures they'll do with 4-man fronts like they've been doing. And a lot of times Pete Carroll has referenced this. His 4-3 has a lot of 3-4 principles. So I don't expect that they're going to be reinventing the wheel necessarily. But you are going to see overhang linebackers, Darrell Taylor, Uchenna Nwosu, that either both of them can blitz or they can both drop back or one can go and the other one drops back. They're going to be able to do a lot of that stuff, and they like the big bodies that they have along the defensive line, like Al Woods, bringing back Quentin Jefferson, Shelby Harris, who's part of the Russell Wilson trade, an underrated player, one of the most underrated defensive tackles in the league. So they really like the group that they've got there up front to be able to run this 3-4 scheme. And Clint Hurt, the nice thing about him, and you've heard this from multiple players, is that he's not going to put too much stock in what he is scheming up. He wants his players to be able to come up to him and say, look, this is what we need to do. And he's going to be adaptable, which a lot of coaches in the NFL are not. And that's why he's pretty popular. He's a player's coach that will listen to input, and then he will use his football knowledge. He's also very knowledgeable on secondary play, surprisingly. He knows the entire defense. Bringing in Sean Desai, former Bears coordinator, to work with him. Those two both were under Vic Fangio in Chicago for a few years. They feel like they schematically can take a big leap with this new coaching staff.
Okay, so the edge, even though you mentioned a couple of those players, Taylor and Nwosu, would you call that still the top need on defense?
I would put that as number
okay.
2. I think that they absolutely need to add another pass rusher in this draft early. And this is a class that's got a lot of depth there, a lot of talent.
Oh.
So if they can get somebody like a Boye Mafe or Arnold Ebiketie, trying to think of some of the other guys that I've mocked to him on day 2 that would make some sense. But those are guys that are athletic enough to drop back in coverage, but also can rush as 3-4 linebackers. And there are a lot of guys in the first early second that can check off that box. Drake Jackson from USC is another one that I think would be very intriguing playing that role. If they want to go a little smaller, like a Hassan Reddick style 3-4 outside linebacker, Nick Benito from Oklahoma could be a guy that makes some sense. D'Angelo Malone from Western Kentucky. I can keep rattling off names.
It's deep.
There's a lot of really intriguing 3-4 style edge rushers in this class. So they should be able to get a player like that. As far as biggest need, I've gotten some flack from Seahawks fans for this because I think Jordan Brooks is a fantastic player. But if you are going to be running a 3-4, you need somebody that can replace Bobby Wagner. And so I would not be surprised, even in the first round, if the Seahawks traded down a few spots, a player like Devin Lloyd from Utah, who, in my opinion, is one of the top 10 players in this draft. That's just my opinion.
I can understand that.
I think he's an incredible talent, and he is a modern-day linebacker. He can cover. He can blitz. He can rush off the edge. He can stuff the run. He can do it all. If a player like that is available to you and you trade down and you recoup a pick or two on top of it, I would not be shocked if John Schneider says, I know that we picked a linebacker 2 years ago, but let's pick another one, and those two can be the cornerstones of our defense moving forward. Because I'll tell you what, the Rams have picked them apart with deep crossers the last couple years. And getting more athletic and getting a true cover linebacker, and Lloyd is definitely that. He can do it all, but he is a very good cover linebacker. That would be a much bigger need than I think a lot of fans realize, especially after losing Bobby Wagner.
And you bring up Lloyd's name, and we were just talking about how the quarterbacks will get overdrafted. Inside linebackers get underdrafted. So you could see Willis and Pickett get taken in the top 10. Lloyd could end up like the 20th pick of the draft, and you're going, oh, wait, this doesn't make any sense. Lloyd is much more talented prospect than those two guys.
And that would be a steal. In today's NFL, I understand the devaluing of linebackers to an extent, but with the quick passing game and how teams are eating teams up with crossers and dig routes and stuff, you need linebackers that can move and are disciplined and can make plays on the football. Devin Lloyd can do all three of those things. So I have mocked him at number 9 on a couple of mock drafts to the Seahawks. And there have been fans that have been like, why would we pick a linebacker? Because sometimes you just got to pick the best player.
Yes.
And if you're running a 3-4, he and Jordan Brooks are going to be on the field all the time. So that's just my opinion. He's a guy that can rush off the edge too. There's a lot of talent at the linebacker position though. So if you don't get Devin Lloyd, You could still get somebody like a Channing Tindall from Georgia in the third round potentially, or Troy Anderson from Montana State, who's a lot of fun. 232 pounds, runs in the 4.4s. There's a lot of talent at the linebacker position. So if you don't want to reach, but Devin Lloyd would be the one guy. If you're wanting an elite talent at the linebacker position, I think he's a top 10 guy in this draft. Probably won't go in the top 10, though, because of his position.
And once you get past Lloyd, like you said, even though it's very deep, there probably isn't going to be another inside linebacker that even goes in the first round. Maybe a guy could slip in because anything happens at the end of the first round. And you know that.
Nakobe Dean would be the other guy that I think maybe. But he's small. That's the issue that he's working against.
And then you got Muma.
He's a fantastic football player.
Matter of fact, I think so much so that until this whole process started where you started to pick apart size and everything else, it was like, oh, that guy's a top 10 pick. That's how good he is. But then you start realizing, well, he's got size limitations. This is the NFL. So he has to get into the right system. But he's a fantastic player. You know, Muma and Clark are other guys. But then, like you said, once you even get into the middle rounds, I mean, you got guys like Fadu Kasi, McFadden was a very productive guy out of Indiana, Fago from Navy, Harris, Chenal. We can go on and on and on with all the inside linebacker talent that there's going to be in those middle rounds.
Yep. It might be the deepest position group in this draft aside from edge rushers. I mean, and maybe corner. This is a very good corner class, too. Which is one reason why I think a lot of people are speculating Seattle would not go corner early. If Sauce Gardner's there at 9, though, I think Pete Carroll's going to have a hard time not bucking his previous trend where, I mean, they've never picked a corner early in the third round. They just don't normally pick them that early because Pete Carroll believes he can coach up guys. And for the most part, he has been able to do that. But if Sauce Gardner's there at 9, I think he's going to have a very hard time not making that pick.
And Chris is not. Right? I mean, it's just because I was talking to Ryan Dunleavy, who covers the Giants, and he's like, and since they got 2 picks in the first round, he goes, there's no way the Giants are not taking Gardner. There's just no way. He fits too much into what they're looking for. And I even know the Jets might even attract Gardner, but he picks after the Seahawks.
The Texans at number 3 is where I think he's going to go, personally. I think he's a top 3 pick. He's fantastic.
I agree with you 100%. He's one of the best corner prospects to come along in years. Would a player like Taylor Britt then be the more Seattle corner with his size if they wanted to pick somebody like in the third round?
He is one of the guys that I have bookmarked thinking that is a Seahawk corner.
Go.
And they just had him in for a visit too, but he just plays the game with the physicality, the chip on his shoulder. He's more athletic than people realize. Nebraska's been down the last couple of years, but he's a good football player, and he's got good ball skills on top of it. So I could see him being a guy at pick 72 in the third round, and maybe even one of their second rounders if they really love him. But they've never picked a corner that early. I think 72 is about the ballpark that they would be picking a corner unless Sauce Gardner fell into their lap at number 9. But yeah, he's a guy that I think could make a lot of sense. The kid from Sam Houston State, that Zion McCullum, is another one in the middle rounds to watch because he's got size and he's a freak athlete compared to a lot of the other corners in this class. Tariq Woolen's another one with the size. He's got the thing that people have to understand, though, is they drafted Trey Brown last year, who was not the 32-inch arms and tall, lengthy corner. They've kind of changed their prototype a little bit. So I'm curious to see if they revert back to the type of corner they've preferred or if they continue that progression, especially with them likely to play more man coverage this year. They probably are going to be looking for a little different style corner than they have in the past. So that's something to keep in mind.
So right now, who would be the 2 outside corners? Would it be Brown? Would he be one of them?
If he's healthy. He's coming back from a patellar tendon injury, which those can be really tricky to come back from. If he's healthy, I think so. But I would say Sidney Jones and Artie Burns are probably the 2 outside starters right now. And Burns played really well the last 6 games for the Bears last year with Sean Desai as the defensive coordinator. So those 2 are teaming back up together. That might end up being a sneaky good signing for Seattle. We'll have to see. They really like Trey Brown. It's just, again, that's a tough injury to come back from.
Okay.
So they got to see where he's at when training camp gets here.
Let's scroll up to the offense. And what's up with Metcalf? Is Metcalf?
He's
He's
not
not
going
going.
anywhere.
Okay.
I'm hesitant to say I'd be stunned about anything at this point with what the Seahawks have done
Yeah.
this offseason. This has truly been an offseason that has shown anything can
Sure.
happen. Because I was kind of in that 1 foot in, 1 foot out on the Russell Wilson trade rumor. I was not one of those reporters like there's absolutely no way this is going to happen, but I also wasn't like, oh, this is going to happen. There seemed to be a little more than smoke, but there just didn't seem like there was a trade partner out there that made sense for them. And ultimately, Denver ended up being that team, and this is something they were working on for a while. But
do you think they got enough in
yeah,
return? Was the fan base?
I do. I think that they got a pretty solid return package, especially, I mean, if Drew Lock can end up giving them something and produce, then suddenly that trade looks a lot better. But they've got to hit on their picks. That's the thing. This is not something we're going to be able to evaluate for a few years till we know what Seattle did with these draft picks that they got. Right now, the Broncos obviously would be the winners of this trade because you're getting a future Hall of Fame quarterback. But for Seattle to win this, they're going to have to be able to hit on a bunch of those picks. They're going to have to hope the guys they traded for, the veterans, can contribute as well. So there's a lot of moving parts there. But going back to the receiver position, I think that Metcalf is staying put. He wants to be here. I mean, he showed up for OTAs, or not OTAs, their offseason program on time. He wants to be the leader that steps up with Wilson and Wagner being gone. He feels like that's his responsibility now. They're going to pay him, and they have no excuse for not paying him because Russell Wilson's going to be off the books next year.
Okay. And sticking at wide receiver then, even if it's Metcalf and Lockett, and Swain has shown some moments, and they drafted Eskridge, if they feel confident that they're going to keep this core around for a couple of years, are they okay there?
I could see him drafting a receiver on day 3. I'd be really surprised if they go earlier than that. They still believe D. Eskridge can be an impact player. He had a nasty concussion last year that just set him back. But he's got all the tools to be a really effective third receiver to go with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And Freddie Swain's been a pleasant surprise. He had pretty good production last year as a number 4 receiver. So I don't think it's a huge need. I could see him adding another veteran after the draft, too. So there's a lot of moving parts, but this is another draft that's got depth at that position. So day 3, if they want to get another big-bodied receiver, there are some possibilities there in day 3 that they could go out and add to their group to at least bolster the competition.
Yeah, nowadays in the NFL, you're going to – and this year is no different. You get a ton of really good prospects at the skill positions. Wide receiver, running back. And again, we were talking about position value. You got a running back like Brees Hall, who, in my opinion, is again, I think you look at one of the better prospects to come along in a few years, and he may not even be a first-round draft pick. It's just incredible.
There won't be a running back that goes in the first round this year. There's not a guy. I mean, I would maybe say Hall or Walker in some seasons, in some draft classes, they might have been able to slip into the first round, but I don't expect any of them to go this year. And there are some really good backs that you can get on day 2 and day 3. I think the best running back in this draft class is a guy that's never ran for more than 600 yards in a season in college football. That it's just one of those weird drafts. And that's another reason Dan Mullen is not coaching Florida anymore. But
so Pierce is your guy.
Dameon Pierce is a player. You watch Florida tape, and the guy can just do it all. Between the tackles, runner, surprisingly good as an outside perimeter runner. He pass blocks. He can catch. He's an infectious personality that his teammates want to be around. He would probably be number 1 on my running back board, and Brees Hall would be number 2. I like Dameon Pierce that much. And maybe I'm thinking of it from a Seahawks perspective because he's a thicker, bigger running back like they like. But he checks off all the boxes. And again, you look at what Florida has done the last couple of years, and you're just wondering, shaking your head, like, why was that not the feature back? I don't understand.
And do you see that being 5th round, 6th round area? Seattle goes after another running back?
I could see him go 2 or 3,
really?
To be honest with you. If I had to make a prediction right now, I would say 4th round. pick 109 is the hot spot for drafting a
Okay.
running back. But I could see 72. Rashad Penny had that incredible end of last season, but he has had injury issues. Chris Carson is coming off neck surgery. They're optimistic he's going to be able to play, but man, a running back with a neck issue, and he's had other injuries. Yeah, I could see them going into this season with just Rashad Penny, DJ Dallas, and Travis Homer. I could see Carson being in a position he can't play. Hopefully that's not the case. They've had positive updates on him, but until he actually gets hit and gets on the field, we're not going to know. So they've got some long-term concerns at that position. I think you draft in this deep class of running backs. I think you go out and you get one, and if that means pick 72, getting your feature guy. I mean, Rashad Penny could still end up being that guy if he stays healthy. He's a dynamic playmaker. He's just had so many injury issues. So you've got to have insurance at that position. I think that is one of their sneaky needs going into this draft, and it's a good draft class to take advantage of that.
Yeah, like you said, Penny was so good late. If he can stay healthy the entire season and play anywhere near the way he played at the end of last season, he's in a great position then to earn himself a nice contract. But that's what you're looking for if you're Seattle. And whether or not you're the team that resigns him or not, you're going to get at least, you're hoping you get that one big year from him, which would be great because it's unfortunate when you see players get banged up as often as he has been. But it was so encouraging to see how well he looked late last season that you just say to yourself,
he looked like a first-round caliber player, which I know a lot of fans were upset about that pick a few years ago. I was one of the few that actually really liked it. But even I last training camp was like, look, I can't defend this anymore because he did not look good in training camp. And he got banged up again. So it's like at some point you just got to be like, cut our losses. But then they had a few injuries. He got his chance again late in the year, and he stayed healthy. And he showed – I think confidence has been a huge issue for him. I think being able to get back out there and have confidence in his knee that he had repaired a few years ago. And – confidence in the blocking schemes. You saw that come together, and now you get a 230-pound home run hitting threat, unlike any other guy in the league. I mean, there's not another running back of his size that can explode like he can. He had 8 runs of 25 yards or more in their last 5 games. That tied the NFL season lead. Jonathan Taylor was the other guy, and he did it on over 200 more carries. That's how explosive this kid is.
Well, again, it would be awesome, but it would be a bonus, and I'm sure that's exactly how Seattle's going to look at it. Before I close out, a couple of our other things. One last thing on the depth chart, that's the offensive line. I know we kind of started there. Who would you say out of this offensive line group is like a definite? Is it just Jackson because of him being a veteran, or is Damian Lewis the other guy?
Damian Lewis is one of their few foundational pieces they have on the offensive line. He's going into year 3. He had some injuries last year. It was kind of a rough sophomore season for him, but he was very good his rookie year. So they're hoping a healthy Damian Lewis can get back on track this year. Gabe Jackson, I actually looked at as a potential guy they might try to move after 1 year just because he's getting to be an older player. But for now, it looks like he's going to be your guy at right guard. And they signed Austin Blythe to replace Ethan Posick at center. So center's still a spot I could see them drafting fairly early. This is a top-heavy center class. Once the first 4 or 5 guys are gone, there's a huge drop-off. So I feel like the tackle groups are better than the center groups are in this particular draft. But, yeah, they don't have any other long-term answers right now. Maybe Stone Forsythe and Jake Curhan will be long-term starters at tackle, but they have 5 combined starts. Like I said at the beginning of the show, you take Curhan out of the equation, the 2 other guys have as many starts to tackle in the NFL as I do. So it's just uncertainty. There's some guys with potential there, but you can't roll into the season with those guys without at least bringing some veterans in to compete against them. You just can't do that.
And there definitely has to be 2 tackles, whether it's one in the draft or somehow they find one of these veterans because there's still like 5 veteran linemen that are out there in free agency. You mentioned, of course, Brown, who could come back. So, right, there's got to be at least 2 more additions to tackle.
I think they need to draft at least, and I'm going to say this clearly, at least 2 tackles in this draft class. That's how dire the situation is. You could take a flyer on somebody on day 3, too. But I wouldn't be shocked if they draft 2 tackles their first 4 picks because it's that big of a need. and they could still go out and sign somebody after
Yes.
the draft if they
Yes.
wanted to. So I just feel like it's, quarterback is obviously long-term
Sure.
their biggest need. But tackle right now is the biggest need on the roster because they have 3 guys with 5 combined starts.
Not good.
So they've got to figure that out, whether it's adding a first-round pick, maybe a guy like Charles Cross, or using a second-rounder. There's some intriguing tackles that still should be on the board on day 2. Or re-signing Dwayne Brown to go with a mid-round pick. I mean, they've got a number of different alternatives, but they've got to figure it out. And that has been a real Achilles heel for this organization, finding offensive linemen in general and developing them. So they have to curb that now in the post-Russell Wilson era to have a chance to be successful.
And is there a player on the roster that's not a Seattle fan, someone from the outside, doesn't know the roster from, head to toe like you do? Is there a player or two that you can say, you know what, watch out for this guy? He may be on the verge of a breakout.
Darrell Taylor would be the first one that I would mention on defense. Last year was his first season in the NFL. He missed his whole rookie year because he was recovering from leg surgery. 6.5 sacks last year. He was inconsistent, but it really was his rookie season.
Yep.
You see the quick first step, the explosive pass rushing. And the other thing that this kid can do, he'll shock you with how much power he has as a bull rusher, turning speed to power. This kid has the tools to be a perennial double-digit sack guy. And I think a 3-4 defense is going to be a great fit for him because he's athletic enough to drop into coverage. He did that at Tennessee in college. So I could see Darrell Taylor being a breakout guy this year on defense. And on offense, I'm going to go with a newcomer. Noah Fant has been productive in Denver, but not as much as he wants to be. And I think with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett taking attention away from opposing defenses, Noah Fant is a player that I think Shane Waldron, the coordinator, is going to find a way to get heavily involved, especially if Drew Lock is your quarterback, because they have chemistry from their time together in Denver. So I think, I don't know if breakout year is the right way to word it, but I could see Noah Fant having the best season of his career with receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns, and really being a dynamic third threat to go with Metcalf.
And look, bottom line is you look at the roster, you look at the skill position players. If Penny stays healthy and you have Fant, and you have Lockett, and you have Metcalf, and they could fix the offensive line, obviously, and we would imagine that's what their aim is going to be in the draft, that it's up to the quarterback. And that's really the case with a lot of teams in the NFL. Now, there are some teams that don't have that going for them, but Seattle does. So they're just now, like you said, can they find that next franchise quarterback again? And it may not have to be somebody as talented as Russell Wilson, as long as you're playing really good defense and maybe you can run the football as much as Pete Carroll wants to. So, but whether or not the quarterback's on the roster or whether or not he's going to be drafted in April, that's the last missing piece right now for the franchise, or at least for the offense.
Yeah, that is clearly, again, long-term, that is the position. Now, maybe Drew Lock, all he needs is a change of scenery. He did have some rough circumstances in Denver, and some of it was his own doing, too. He'll admit that. Like, I'm not going to excuse my play. If the talent starts to actually produce at maximum capacity, he has the live arm, and he'll take the shots downfield. I mean, this could be a good fit for him, chucking balls up to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So I'm not going to sit here and predict that's what's going to happen because I've watched the tape in Denver and it's very uneven. Don't know what you're going to get from him. I actually made the argument yesterday on our podcast that Geno Smith might be the favorite to be the starter because Geno Smith knows the offense, and he and DK Metcalf have a very good rapport. Last year, Metcalf, 2 of his top 3 receiving games were games started by Geno Smith, which is a really interesting factoid. But I could see Geno Smith potentially being the guy if Drew Lock doesn't take that big step and quickly learn the offense. The team trusts Geno Smith. And obviously, he's not going to be your long-term guy. He would be a placeholder. But especially if you draft a quarterback, you could start Geno early in the season, and then they could move to whoever the other quarterback is. If that rookie's not ready to play in week 1, there's a lot of moving parts. And honestly, I can't tell you what's going to happen at that position because you've got your veterans. They could draft a quarterback. They could still go out and get Baker Mayfield. They're a team that's kind of been rumored. I don't think they're that interested right now If they could get the Browns to eat most of that salary, though, I think John Schneider's ears would perk up and he'd be willing to do that. So there are still a lot of moving parts. They certainly are not out of the quarterback business at
Being
this
out
point.
west and, of course, the same division as San Francisco, what's your take on Jimmy G? Is he going to? Do you think he'll return, or do you think San Francisco could be on draft day? Will find a way to get rid of him.
I don't know how they can trade him right now, coming off shoulder surgery, and which teams need quarterbacks? I mean, unless you're going to trade him to Seattle, and I don't think the Seahawks would want to make a move for Garoppolo in division. I don't think the Seahawks would be interested in doing that. Carolina, I guess. I mean, Pittsburgh. I mean, most teams have their quarterback situation figured out aside from maybe drafting somebody. So, and Baker Mayfield's figuring that out in Cleveland right now. There's just not many options out there. So the 49ers might be stuck in a situation where they're going to have to cut him, or this would be the worst case scenario. You have to hang on to him, and you're planning to move on to your young quarterback. That would be the last thing they would want to have happen. But right now, that is a possibility because I just don't know who's going to take him. I really don't.
Interesting. Well, that's definitely one of the things to follow. And like you said, well, we'll find out in the draft because we have to find out is Detroit, who I think more than likely will use like their second round pick on a quarterback. And then next year they could go after one of those two quarterbacks, one of those two superstar quarterbacks. But what does Atlanta do? Does Atlanta go with the homegrown kid Willis? Or do they say, you know what, we're going to wait till next year and we're going to go after one of those top two quarterbacks? So that's the thing. You don't know. There's how many teams. The Eagles look like they're going to invest in Hurst for one more season. But next year they might decide that they want to have, which might have been part of the whole deal with the Saints. Next year, they want to make sure that they have enough ammunition that if it doesn't work out, that they can go after those two guys. So there might be 5 teams looking for an opportunity to draft those 2 stud quarterbacks if they both come out next year. That's why, obviously, we won't know until after the draft, but that's going to be the interesting question for a lot of these general managers.
Yeah, I think next year's draft and just the fact that this year's quarterback class is not viewed highly by most experts, I think that is something that is weighing on the minds of general managers all around the league right now. And so that's really impacting the decision making, which is why the Saints getting a second first rounder was something that kind of took me back a little bit. But if there's a guy they really love, maybe Kenny Pickett could be a potential fit playing in the Dome down there. If there's a guy they fall in love with, they want to move up, then now they have the ammunition that they can do it. And so there's a lot of moving parts. I think next year you could see a few teams that aren't in the quarterback market. As you mentioned, Philadelphia, that could be next year, but they're not going to be jumping out to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo and his salary right now. No. Put it that way.
Okay. Last question then is give me a wild card pick. Give me a pick with the number 9 pick in the draft that Seattle makes that will surprise everybody. And I asked this to everybody that I've talked to in the last couple of weeks, but this is the first time that I know that this could really happen. Because if there's any franchise that makes a lot of strange picks in the first round, it seems to be Seattle. So give me a player from left field or a position from left field that Seattle goes after with the 9th pick.
So I already mentioned Devin Lloyd, so I can't go there again. Yeah. Devin Lloyd would be a wild card to watch, but this is a position of major need, so I think fans understand it. But Tyler Linderbaum, the center from Iowa at number 9, I might be a little rich, but I think he is the best center prospect that has come out in the last 10 years. Couldn't agree more. He is fantastic, and he's a perfect fit for the zone scheme that they're wanting to run. And so maybe 9's a little rich, but they have struggled since Max Unger left. They traded him away as part of the Jimmy Graham trade. They have not found that rock, that top 10 center. Tyler Linderbaum could be that guy right away. They skipped on the opportunity to draft Creed Humphrey a year ago. Maybe that's how they try to have a little bit of retribution for that mistake. And they go out and they get Linderbaum. So that would be another name that I would keep an eye on. I like that one.
And especially if they wind up trading down, like you said, for potentially for either a quarterback or a linebacker.
Yeah. If you can get him at like 15 or 16 and Linderbaum's probably still going to be available, I think that's a great value pick at that point.
And that's why I'm with you. It's just like what we talked about with Lloyd and the running back position. It's the same thing with Linderbaum. Is he, in my mind, I think he's one of the top there's no doubt in my mind he's one of the top 10 prospects in this year's draft. No doubt in my mind. But the chances of him getting drafted in the top 10 are just, it's not going to happen. That's not what happens in the NFL.
And it's weird to me because center, to me, is an incredibly important position.
Yes.
I just don't understand the devaluing of it because what they do with line communications and stuff like that. Seattle learned that last year. Kyle Fuller was the starter the first 7 games, and I don't know how many sacks that Dwayne Brown gave up, and you saw him turn around. And Brown's not somebody that gets mad easily, but you could just tell he was angry, and he was looking towards the center like something was not communicated properly. They switched back to Ethan Posick, and then Dwayne Brown gave up 1 sack the rest of the year. So just the difference having a good center makes for your entire offense. I just think it's an incredibly important position, and I'm surprised that it's devalued in the draft as much as it is.
And the quarterback, obviously, especially if he's a young kid, how that can you can grow together as a young quarterback and a young center for many years, and how important that is. That's why I always try to talk about how you can't zero in as a fan all the time on stats, especially at the quarterback position. Well, he's getting pressured all the time, and I had to deal with that as a Jet fan with Sam Darnold. Oh, yeah, but it's not right. He hasn't had the right protection. He doesn't. Well, who do you think is partly in charge of that? It's the quarterback. You don't understand that. He has a lot to do with protection, just as, like you said, Dwayne Brown is a left tackle. You're probably going, well, wait a second. He's giving up all these sacks. What's wrong with him? It's not his fault necessarily. You got to look at the guy who's making the calls on the line. So there's so many different variables that take place with a football team that you can't always zero in on specific stats to define a specific player.
Yep, it's a very true story. And it's just like going back to the testing too. Testing in the pre-draft process is incredibly important. And a lot of times it's indicative of performance, but not always. So it's that scope. You've got to look at a little bit of analytics. You got to look at a little bit of film. For me, it's a lot of film. I think the film is still the biggest. I want guys that can play football. And then I'll look at the testing numbers. And a lot of times it confirms what I see on film. Sometimes you'll see guys that run slower 40s than you expect, but you watch game tape and you're like, that guy has football speed. And so to me, film is still most important, but you have to be able to look at all those different factors when you're weighing these decisions. And there's other things that go into it that are off field that you have to consider as well.
Yeah, that's why when you get stumped, why did they take that player? Or why did they sign that player? There's a reason. Maybe it's a scheme change. You don't know that. Maybe he's bad in zone coverage, but you put him in man. So there's just so many reasons. That's why I always say, as long as you trust the guy making the decision, and I trust, as a Jet fan, I trust Joe Douglas. That's all I continuously say. Oh, this is who I want. This is who I'd like. But you know what? At the end of the day, I trust Joe Douglas. Why he makes the picks or whatever the reason, I'm just going to trust the process. And you have to, because that's and again, Schneider's been with Seattle for many years, and he hasn't hit on draft picks as much as he would have liked to have over the years. But he's there for this long for a reason. He obviously does better than most general managers in the league. He may not be the best, but he does a pretty good job, and he deserves a lot of credit for why Seattle has been a very successful franchise for as long as he's been there.
Yeah, I think a lot of the criticism for his drafts is overblown. Free agency has been a disaster for the most part. When you give Luke Jokel $8 million on a one-year contract, there have been some real head scratchers. Those are the type of moves that you're like, okay, I know what this guy has done in 5 years in the NFL.
Yeah.
And if you would have taken a minimum flyer on him, that's one thing. But it just feels like they have burned cap space for players like that. I've joked about this, but I feel like John Schneider has a 2013 first-round bingo card that he's been trying to fill out over the years. The number of guys that they've brought in that didn't work out with their first team from that dreadful 2013 class, even second-rounders, Geno Smith, Eddie Lacy. I mean, they have been playing that bingo card hardcore. And so free agency has been a problem. But I feel like the draft, especially the last couple of years, that 2020 draft class had Darrell Taylor. Jordan Brooks, I think, is a superstar in the making. He's going to be able to step in. He had 184 tackles last year. The guy is a monster, and I think he's just getting started in his career. He's going into year 3. And Damian Lewis can be a long-term starter at guard. I mean, that 2020 class has a chance to be a pretty darn good one. 2019, they got DK Metcalf. They missed on a number of picks. But, I mean, I feel like that's been a bit harsh in terms of criticism. Free agency has really been the biggest detriment. They've made too many signings and wasted too much cap space on players that simply didn't pan out that they probably shouldn't have tried to sign, if we're being realistic.
Probably would have done a lot better if he was born 20 years earlier and he was running a team in the NFL back in the 60s and the 70s where there was no free agency. And all you did was worry about the draft. So some general managers are like
drafting,
that.
Developing players. And again, their drafts have been a lot more hit and miss the last 7-8 years than they were early in their tenure. That's undeniable. I just feel like some of the people that are like, I don't trust him to draft anybody. It's
That's
like,
too much.
I don't fall on that line. Certainly he has not been as good as of late, but you're still last couple draft classes, they've brought in some solid talent.
Yeah, and we just went over there's talent on this football team. There's no doubt about it. And if they had a successful top 10 quarterback, which they're not going to have this season, no matter what happens, they could be a dangerous team. But that's always the last kind of trick with these types of teams. You get like 10 or 15 teams in the NFL that are in that like window that, man, if we just had that superstar quarterback, and that's kind of where every team is nowadays. And the good thing is for Seattle, at least they're not in the AFC right now, where all the
that's the one thing, the NFC and even the NFC West, as vaunted as it's been, there's been some big departures from the division.
And now Kyler Murray wants to leave.
The Rams reloaded a lot of their roster, so that's going to be a problem. But, getting Bobby Wagner, for example. But I look at this team and I feel like next year's got to be the aiming point for where they get back into contention, because you're going to have Russell Wilson's contract off the books. If you didn't get a quarterback this year, you can certainly get one hopefully next year. Get that young guy. This year, you're building the foundation around that quarterback. Or if the quarterback is part of this draft class, you're bringing him in with that foundation you're going to build around him. So this is a very critical draft. And like I said, I think they bought themselves an extra year with trading Russell Wilson and going into a new era, so to speak. But patience is going to run thin, as it always does in the NFL. So you got to hit on some of these picks, and you got to ensure that you have a competitive team next year and that there's progress.
Well, Corbin, great job as always. We look forward to talking to you again before the season starts, when we preview the season for Seattle. And unless, of course, there's some news breaking story between now and then that we can have a chat. But I always enjoy having these conversations to find out what's going on in Seattle. And as I mentioned before, I can't wait to maybe move out to that part of the country, which I love, being a big Vancouver Canuck fan, as I've mentioned before. I'd like to maybe get season tickets. That's like my ideal retirement plan, is living out in the Northwest, beautiful part of the country, get season tickets to Vancouver. Of course, now if you're in Seattle, you get season tickets to the Kraken. So
yeah, they get the nice hockey team, brand new stadium. Still hoping that the Sonics are going to come back.
That's the last one.
That's the big thing. Get the NBA back in Seattle.
One more to go. All right, Corbin. And then, like you said, YouTube, is that 5 days a week?
5 days a week, Locked On Seahawks. We're streaming video casts, and you can find all of our written content for all Seahawks at sa.com/NFL/Seahawks.
Thanks, Corbin. We'll talk to you next time.
Yep, thanks for having me.